negotiation, why a lot of people think they're not good negotiators, right? So what we're going to do is today, I'm just going to go through a little bit on the Harvard Business Review, just some basic tips in negotiation that might help people here. I'm trying to get my live streaming at trying to get the live stream going on YouTube and Facebook today. So it's a little bit of a little tricky, but we're almost there. So, anyways, what I'm gonna do is we are going to be looking at an old Harvard Business School article today called "Bad Negotiation: 9 Tips You Can Use for." Excuse me. Nope, not there. There it is. Nope, not there either. There it is. It is 9 mistakes you can avoid at the bargaining table. Okay, so we'll go through these. We're going to add a little bit on each one, and I'll give you guys just a little bit of my experience from, I guess, 20 years of negotiating between music, real estate, business, etc. Right. So, anyways, articles from 2018, but I still think it's very relevant today. By the way, guys, if you ever just like want to learn something, Harvard Business School is like this amazing wealth of information. I literally go on it once a week, sort of read an article just like this. Anyways, first thing we're going to talk about today is kind of a basic one, but it's forgetting to shake hands. You guys would be surprised how much a simple handshake can go a long way to just building trust in a negotiation, right? When you meet someone, offer to shake their hand, like put your hand out for them, right? Very awkward for me. I'm left-handed. Majority of the world is right-handed, so I'm always the lead of that all the time, right? You'll see here, Harvard Business Review, they're talking about how this is kind of a cultural thing. And negotiating conveys a willingness to cooperate and reach a deal that considers the interests of the parties at the table, right? By paying attention to this behavior, negotiators can communicate their motives and intentions and better understand how the other side is approaching discussions. So just little tips like that, right? Little things go a long way, right? I have had real estate deals for sure in which like a client I was working with, let's say a buyer I was working with, literally changed their feeling about a property on whether or not the broker that they met at that property shook their hand or not. Literally, just change the energy in the room. You might think that's silly, but a lot of things are nonverbal communication and negotiation, and you guys would be surprised at how much these little things go a long way. Okay, number two, letting stress and anxiety affect your demeanor. I feel like you could write a book about this alone, right? There's something that a vast majority of people in negotiations fail to do, right? They really don't, it's hard, they don't get their emotions in check, right? So first sentence of this, this one says, before entering into a negotiation, take some time to collect your thoughts and get your emotions in check, right? So you don't carry negative emotions into the negotiation, which might impact your success. Very hard to do in the context of something as emotionally driven as like housing, right? People, especially buyers, people fall in love with their heart first and then their head second, right? And sometimes, people will see a house and they're like, this is the one, I gotta buy this, right? And then literally everyone around them, their real estate agent, their attorney, their family, their friends can all say to them, hey, you should consider X, you should consider Y, you should consider Y squared, whatever. But a lot of times people, they will generally just put the blinders on, right? And this is why one of the biggest reasons I think people have remorse in negotiation because they feel like they're under so much pressure, right? And they feel like they have so much, and they let anxiety sort of lead them to just like these really broad outcomes. Like this is great, I want this, or this is horrible, right? And they don't see kind of the nuances and everything, right? And a lot of times those people just frankly don't listen very well. Just kind of calling it what it is, right? And you try to give them advice and they'll be like, yeah, yeah, sounds good. And then they'll literally like a day later, you'll be like, oh yeah, so did you guys, think about that? And you're like, wait, what? And I mean, there's a big reason why people have remorse, right? Because they sort of have tunnel vision when they fall in love with something emotionally, right? And it's not until like literally they're through the process, a few months down the road, that they're like, oh, wait, no one told me about that. Like they'll get kind of angry, right? You see this on people like write like the angry Yelp reviews and things like that. And which is why, like, if you're ever working with someone, if you're ever in an advisory role, like I strongly suggest that you over communicate, right? Meaning, like, if you're trying to make a point to someone, not only tell them verbally, tell them again, text them, call them, email them, like, make a video of it, do whatever you need to do to drill that point home, because there's a very good chance that that person is um, not going to remember what you're saying to them, right? Unless you just constantly just drill it and drill it and drill it and drill it and drill it, right? You might think that's annoying, but frankly, you're doing your client a disservice if you don't do that, right? I promise you. So now let's flip it to the other side of that, right? And this is actually maybe a little bit more about what this point is actually trying to get to, right? A little further down the road here, they talk about you may be reluctant to reveal your interest, for example, fearful of being exploited, right? So this is where I think people they sort of have this belief that everyone is against them, right? And when they're in really high anxiety situations, it's easy to get there. I mean, guys, we've probably all felt like that at one point or another, right? I've had days where they're not the greatest days, and I'm like, oh, this person, blah, 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 blah. And it's like I have to sort of cool off a little bit, right? So I feel like that's really critical, right? Because if you go into any negotiation, right, with this idea that the other person's quote unquote trying to screw you, then you've automatically lost, right? Because really savvy people in business can read that like a book on anyone, right? And then they're going to devise their strategy around that, right? So I feel like you got to take some time and decompress, which is why, like, like, for example, in a purchasing decision, you need to really kind of step back and take some time with that in debrief, right? Like I tell people when they're looking at housing, like don't make an offer the first week you go to see houses, right? It may be the perfect one, right? But take some time to understand, the whole market because you'll feel a lot happier and you'll definitely be better prepared and less stressed when you are working through any negotiations. All right. So number three, neglecting the other side's perspective. This is key. So you'll hear people talk about like steel manning your perspective or something like that, right? Just remember that any negotiation is a two-way street. Um, you know, let's think about it like this, right? Like when I was a concert promoter, right? Um, you know, band A is going on tour. They're playing 45 shows across the US, right? And so let's say that this is in Buffalo, New York, where I was a promoter, right? Let's say that they're playing Cleveland, Ohio the day before me and Toronto the day after me, right? It's in that band's interest to play a show in the city of Buffalo, right? It works well with their driving distance, right? So there's a logical reason why a show on that day in that city would make sense, right? Now, of course, there's two things about that, right? Now that show might be on a Monday night in the middle of December, right? The value, and the ability for people to come to that show is going to be different than a Friday night in April, right? Or something like that, right? So a lot of times you have to be willing to understand both perspectives, right? To really think about, hey, how do we actually hammer out a deal here, right? They talk about it. I guess you want to get to the deeper level of people's motives, right? They talk here about like Chris Voss, who is like this hostage negotiator from the FBI. He wrote a book called Never Split the Difference. If you guys have ever heard of that, I think it's a great book in negotiation. Everyone should read it. Um, but if you don't have time for these kind of things, you can just read articles like this or watch people like me. Anyways, he says a lot of people are used to being asked questions and not having their answers listened to, right? They're going to know right away whether or not you're one of those people, whether or not you ask a question and don't listen for the answer. If you turn them off, it gives them permission to turn you off, right? Really simple thing, right? You got to be able to see the other person's perspective and however they're conveying it to you, right? So, anyways, you guys can look at Chris. I would, if you're interested in that, I think Chris Voss is like a superstar with these things. So I encourage you to check his stuff out in his book. Number 4 on this list is negotiating against yourself, right? Um, Now, what does that mean, right? They talk here, well, a lot of people negotiate against themselves in a sense that they may be very eager to make a deal. So they hear like one trigger word or something like that, and they think, okay, this is the property, right? Like in the housing world, like someone will hear like they'll hear something like a motivated seller or distressed or something like that. And they're like, oh my God, this is a great deal. And they'll sort of like again put the blinders on and and fail to see the whole picture, right? So they're talking this point here and say that negotiation is just another word for persuasion. It's all about convincing the other side to see your side of the story, right? So really, 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 really smart negotiators, right? Especially the more ruthless ones, are going to sort of use that. They'll sort of give you, they'll try to they'll give you what you perceive as like an Easter egg to actually sort of implore you to give up your bargaining chips, right? So you'll see that they'll write the right trigger words, right? And they'll say the right words that'll be like, oh yeah, this is a great deal. And then you, as the person who doesn't realize what's happening along with that, is now like just sort of playing your hand, playing your hand, playing your hand, playing your hand, right? Um, this is also why you go a little bit further here, right? If you're on the other side of the table, right, and you don't understand what the other person wants, the quote here is, if you don't have the full picture of what the other person wants, avoid prematurely presenting numbers and solutions that could work against you, right? So, this is like saying to someone, hey, I don't know how much your, car costs, but I've got $50,000 and that's my budget, right? I would instead say, okay, can you kind of give me a range of what the cars cost and give me an idea of like, can we, I don't really feel comfortable telling you where my max budget is, but I'd just rather have you sort of explain to me what we have to offer, right? And then working from there, right? So, think about like, where those little details are and be careful to kind of check yourself, right? Again, this is why people hire people for these things, right? Because a lot of times people give up ground, they don't even realize it, right? Number 5, using aggressive accusatory language. All right. One of the easiest and fastest ways as if you become a skilled negotiator, right, to know that you're dealing with someone who is not on the other side is how they communicate, right? The words they use, right? How the inflection in their voice, right? How accusatory they are, right? How aggressive they are in their language. If they're, you know, there's a fine line between quote unquote being blunt and being direct versus being too less than diplomatic, right? And so what you might want to kind of think about is really, you know, even record yourself doing this with someone, right? Like say you want to debate something, right? And you might want to kind of think about thinking about your own line of questions, right? And think about more, I guess, open-ended questions. It's what this point notes here. You want to give people the opportunity to explain their reasoning, not just defend themselves, right? When you start punching at people, right, they're going to quickly get on the defensive, and then no one usually wins in that situation because people often think of negotiation as like a war. There's all these reality TV things that you're like, you're going out. But negotiation is often bringing two people together on an agreement, right? So yeah. Number six, immediately giving in to ultimatums. So this is, you'll commonly say this. This used to happen to me all the time in the music industry, right? I would be offered a show. A booking agent would call me at 10 in the morning and they'd say, okay, band A wants to play your 500 capacity room, but we need an offer within the next like 45 minutes. Okay. Well, it doesn't give me ample time to do my research on how other cities are doing, the band's growth, what factors we might have into play to, kind of give ourselves an assurance that the show will actually perform, right? So time sensitive, like, obviously in some negotiations there are going to be differences, right? Like let's say that you're in a housing scenario and you're making an offer and three other people are making an offer and the seller says, hey, I want all offers by this time, right? That is an ultimatum, but at least that's like, hey, this is why we're doing this, right? ultimatums to ultimatums I guess sort of you kind of sometimes I guess you don't want to let what somebody says to you change your strategy, right? And I see this all the time, right? Like people in housing, right, will say like, well, they told us this and this that and there's a million people coming and there's people calling them every day. I'm like, we got to move. And I'm like, guys, just calm down first. Let's make sure we go through our actual strategy, right? Because if we don't, what you're going to end up doing is being caught in a situation where going back up to number one, you're in high stress, high anxiety, and now you're going to end up making a deal that you don't like. Which is why when I was a promoter, an agent would offer me, said artists and said I had to respond in an hour. I said, okay, listen, like I can give you one offer if you give me an hour to respond. I can give you another offer if you give me 12 hours to respond. What's your choice? And usually when you kind of counter those things, um, because I would say to them, like, I don't really like working in haste like that because I don't have enough time and hoping you can respect this to actually do my own research, right? And like 9 out of 10 times, they would say, "Oh yeah, well, just get it to me by tomorrow or something like that," right? So you sort of call the bluff, right? Um, so yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. Moving right along, losing sight of your values. Number seven. So again, I think this comes back to your strategy, right? And what they're talking about here, they say, is, as obstacles arise and you respond to shifting demands, every decision you make should be informed by both your values and the objectives you hope to accomplish, right? So I've seen this a lot, right? Where someone will say to me, hey, Damon, I want to spend no more than $4,000 a month on my total payments, right? My mortgage, my taxes, my insurance, et cetera, right? And I say, great. Okay. So then all of a sudden they see a property that they like fall head over heels in love with, but the monthlies on that property are not going to cost them $5,300, right? And they say, well, you know what? We can make it work. And I say, hey, are you sure? Because 72 hours ago, you were saying this was your hard max, right? I don't want you to lose sight of your objective here and just do something because you feel like there's like this is like that you're at a point where this is what you have to do, right? So I would say, why not take a breather even for a night just to run through your budget run through your true finances, run through and see how much of a factor that extra $1,300 would make, right? You want the better you have a clear understanding of yourself and your position, and I guess your sort of objective, right? And your values, the less that you will, the better negotiator you will be. All right. Moving right along. Number 8, rushing the process. It's funny. I have been working with people for 20 years, right? I've worked with bands that were not ready to play a show, but they like wanted to get on stage, right? And they're like, Damon, we'll do whatever. We'll give you $500 to be on this bill, which is crazy town, right? But or even let's bring it up to maybe a more current situation. I meet a buyer and they say, hey, Damon, our landlord just called us and they're going to be selling the building. They want us to move out in 45 days. We want to buy a house. And I say, look, why don't you guys, instead of trying to like sign a contract tomorrow on like a potentially, $1 million+ decision, right? What if you guys rent for 3 months or 6 months, right? And then that gives you time to sort of like reevaluate and really figure out what you want and try to actually come to a place where you are making a decision you're comfortable with, right? Because otherwise, you're going to rush into something and you're not going to have enough time to do the due diligence. You're going to give into demands. You're not going to get the best price. And you're not going to commit to a strong bargaining strategy, right? So that's really, really, really not ideal, right? And I think oftentimes people in the real estate industry get a bad rap because consumers say, well, this person's trying to rush me, right? Or any salesperson for that matter, this person's trying to rush me, right? And I bet you if you ask 9.9 out of 10 people in sales professions, they don't want to try to rush to a decision with anyone, right? Because if they value their career, they understand that, you know, how well you do or don't do in one individual deal, one individual person is not nearly as important as the sum total of like your year or your quarter or things like that, right? And the damage that can be done from an unhappy customer that feels like they were rushed is so much more, is so much bigger than the gain that can be made from one individual deal, right? So a lot of times people, when they rush, right, what they don't realize that they're the ones that are putting on the gas pedal, right? And then 6 months down the road, they say, oh, well, so and so, wanted us to sign a contract. I'm like, guys, like, so when I hear that from people, I immediately say, look, I don't know if this is the right situation. I'll be very, very, very direct of them and say, like, you got to slow down a little bit. You got to slow down, right? All right. So last thing on here, not understanding your BATNA, right? So what does BATNA mean? It is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, right? So there's entire books about BATNA. Like a lot of people in the commercial real estate industry, it's like a very common term you'll see. You know, not all as they talk about here, not all negotiations will end in a successful business deal in cases where the zone of possible agreement, ZOPA, fails and a mutually agreeable solution isn't possible. A common mistake is failing to understand your BATNA. So yeah, that's a big part of it, right? Like if something is truly, your dream, right? Or in a business case, like if you don't buy said product, what else are you going to do, right? Like what other leverage do you have or optionality do you have, right? You should have an understanding of that before you walk into that negotiation, right? Because the more that you're able to just zone out for a second, take yourself out of it, right? And look at it from a just first principles standpoint of like, okay, this is this is my this is what I'm looking at if this doesn't work, right? That can save you a ton of stress and anxiety. Um, I would encourage anyone who's interested in BATNAs, just you can read literal great articles about them. You should always understand your BATNA in like anything you do, right? Is like just what's your alternative if you don't make a deal here, right? What does that look like? So I'm gonna take the share off real quick. Thank you guys. That's a 9 from the Harvard Business School. Again, they post a ton of great content all the time. So I'm a huge, huge, huge fan of the Harvard Business School and everything they do. Encourage you guys to check them out. This is just the like tip of the iceberg when it comes to negotiation. There is literally dozens, if not hundreds, of different things to consider. Um, I think the biggest thing is proper, if you can take one key point out of everything we discussed today, it's preparation, right? It's preparation, managing, well, I guess two things, preparation and managing emotions. Three things, knowing your BATNA, right? If you wanted to boil down everything I just talked about into those like three critical points, that's it, right? So hopefully that makes sense. I'm gonna try to do some more of these live streams. My goal is to just try to help people in everyday life, and whatever they're thinking about and doing and negotiating, whatever, just maybe come to the table a little bit more prepared, right? Because if you want to truly have more equal outcomes, you will get on the level of your counterparty. Anyways, I hope that is good. I'm going to stop the stream now and we'll talk soon. All right.